This video is sponsored by Aura. If you've ever experienced identity theft, think about what happened and how it impacted you. What did you learn from the experience, and what steps did you take to recover? Sharing your story can help others understand the importance of protecting their identity and inspire them to take action with Aura and their different features to avoid a similar situation. Data broker opt-out, identity theft protection, financial fraud protection, certified data security and privacy, VPN, antivirus, password manager, and 24/7 US-based support. Don't leave yourself open to hackers and scammers. Go to aura.com/crystallinecrime to get your 14-day free trial. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video.
Harry Minto was born in Salem, Oregon in 1864, the son of Oregon pioneer John Minto. In 1890, he married Jessie Glenn. Minto served as chief of police for the Salem Police Department from 1891 to 1895 and later held 2 terms as Marion County Sheriff. Elected in 1908, he remained in office until 1913. His older brother, John Wilson Minto, had also served as both sheriff and chief of police in Portland. In 1914, Governor Oswald West appointed Minto as superintendent of the Oregon State Penitentiary, succeeding Burton K. Lawson, who had been involved in the events in Copperfield, Oregon earlier that year. As warden, Minto oversaw the notorious serial killer Carl Panzram in June of 1915, when Panzram was still in his early 20s and before his known murders. Warden Harry Minto was known for his strict disciplinary approach, which included beatings, isolation, and other harsh measures. On September 27, 1915, inmate Otto Hooker escaped from a prison work gang, prompting a widespread search by law enforcement. After Hooker shot and wounded an officer, Minto tracked him down near Albany around 11:30 p.m. There, Minto confronted Hooker, who responded by shooting him in the head, killing him instantly. Hooker was fatally wounded the following day during his capture. Minto's remains were cremated in Portland, Oregon. Hooker's accomplice, Carl Panzram, was later executed in 1930 for murdering a prison employee at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth. Lyda Keller was born on October 16, 1892, in Catesville, Missouri, a town situated in the central flatlands of the state, approximately 60 miles northeast of Kansas City. Keller married Robert Dooley on March 17, 1912, and the couple settled on a ranch in Twin Falls, Idaho, with Robert's brother Ed Dooley. In 1913, they welcomed a daughter, Lorraine, who tragically passed away in 1915. Keller claimed her death resulted from drinking contaminated well water. Shortly after, in August of 1915, Edward Dooley also died, with ptomaine poisoning cited as the cause. Later that year, on October 12, 1915, Robert Dooley succumbed to typhoid fever, leaving Keller as the sole surviving family member. She collected life insurance payouts following each death. 2 years later, in 1917, Keller married William G. McHaffel. Soon after, her 3-year-old daughter fell ill and died, prompting the couple to relocate to Montana. A year later, on October 1, 1918, McHaffel suddenly fell ill, reportedly from influenza, and passed away. His death certificate listed the cause as influenza and diphtheria. In March of 1919, Keller wed Harlan C. Lewis, an automobile salesman from Billings, Montana. Just 4 months into their marriage, Lewis fell ill and died from complications related to gastroenteritis. Keller married for a 4th time in August of 1920, exchanging vows with Edward F. Meyer, a ranch foreman in Pocatello, Idaho. However, Meyer soon developed typhoid and died mysteriously on September 7, 1920. Twin Falls chemist Earl Dooley, a relative of Keller's first husband, grew suspicious of the numerous deaths surrounding her. Teaming up with a physician and another chemist, he investigated further and discovered that Ed and Robert Dooley had been murdered with arsenic poisoning. Twin Falls County prosecutor Frank Steffen launched a formal investigation, leading to the exhumation of the bodies of 3 of Keller's husbands, her 4-year-old daughter, and her brother-in-law. Upon examination, some remains contained traces of arsenic, while others were suspected of arsenic poisoning due to their unusually well-preserved state. Steffen also uncovered Keller's financial motives through records from the Idaho State Life Insurance Company in Boise. Each of her 4 deceased husbands had named her as the beneficiary on their life insurance policies, allowing her to collect over $7,000 from the deaths of her first 3 spouses. Law enforcement eventually tracked Keller down in Honolulu, where she had married for a 5th time to Navy Petty Officer Paul Southard. Following her extradition to Idaho, she was arraigned on June 11, 1921. Now known as Lyda Southard, she was extradited to Idaho to stand trial for the murder of Edward Meyer. Despite pleading not guilty, she was convicted of using arsenic to poison her husbands and profiting from their life insurance policies. Investigators determined that her primary motive was financial gain, as she had taken out and collected life insurance payouts on each of her deceased spouses. After a 6-week trial, Southard was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to a term of 10 years to life at the old Idaho State Penitentiary. On May 4, 1931, she escaped and fled to Denver, Colorado, where she began working as a housekeeper for Harry Whitlock. The two married in March of 1932, but later that year, Whitlock aided authorities in her arrest in Topeka, Kansas on July 31, 1932. Southard was returned to prison in August of 1932. She was granted probation in October of 1941 and later received a full pardon. Lyda Southard passed away from a heart attack on February 5, 1958 in Salt Lake City, Utah. She was laid to rest at Sunset Memorial Park in Twin Falls, Idaho.
Florence Arlene Small was born on March 27, 1879, in Hortonville, Nova Scotia. In December of 1911, she married Frederick L. Small, a Boston stockbroker in Fayetteville, Massachusetts. This was Frederick's 3rd marriage. In May of 1914, the couple relocated to Ossipee, New Hampshire. On September 28, 1916, their home in Ossipee, known as Fellsmere, was destroyed by fire. Due to the remote location of the cottage, the fire consumed the house before rescuers could respond. Frederick was away on a business trip at the time, and Florence's body was later discovered in the debris. Despite severe burns, an examination revealed she had a cord around her neck, a bullet wound above one eye, and head injuries. The couple had no children. Florence was survived by her mother, Elizabeth Curry, and her sister, Norma Curry. Frederick L. Small was charged with the murder of his wife, allegedly to collect $20,000 from an insurance policy. The trial was presided over by Judge John Keevil, with attorney William S. Matthews serving as Small's senior counsel. The prosecution was led by County Solicitor Walter Hill and Attorney General James P. Tuttle. Police Inspector Andrew Houghton, from a Boston-based detective agency, conducted the investigation. During the trial, Ossipee residents testified about Frederick Small's aggressive physical and verbal abuse towards his wife. Helen Connor recalled complimenting Small on his wife's cooking, to which he reportedly responded, "Sometimes I have to take the axe to her." Philip L. Davis testified that he had seen Small kick his wife, curse at her, and order her inside after a flagpole they were installing fell. A local physician recounted being called to the Small residence, where he found Florence bleeding. Small allegedly admitted to the doctor, "I struck her over the head with a boot jack. Damn it, I should kill her. I will kill her." According to the prosecution, within 30 minutes of Florence eating lunch, Small beat, strangled, and shot her before departing for Boston, using the trip as an alibi since he was out of town when the fire engulfed their home. Suspiciously, he took his Masonic apron and other valuables with him despite planning a short trip. Investigators discovered chemical residue smeared on Florence's torso. Additionally, Small's .32 caliber pistol, matching the bullet found lodged in Florence's forehead, was recovered from the ruins, along with a clock rigged as a remote fire-starting device. The prosecution argued that this evidence demonstrated premeditation, proving Florence Arlene Small's death was not accidental but a calculated murder. Frederick L. Small was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to capital punishment. Despite the verdict, he continued to assert his innocence. At the time, New Hampshire law required a minimum of 1 year and 1 day between sentencing and execution. In January of 1918, a petition was filed to delay Small's execution, claiming that a juror had declared Small guilty before any evidence was presented. His legal team also filed a motion for a new trial, but both requests were denied.
On January 15, 1918, Small was hanged at the New Hampshire State Prison in Concord. Florence Arline was laid to rest in Grant Hill Cemetery in Center, Ossipee. On the 91st anniversary of her death, the Ossipee Historical Society, along with local citizens, organized a proper ceremony in her honor, and a marker now identifies her gravesite. On the evening of March 19, 1915, at approximately 7:30 p.m., Anne Cohn sent her 5-year-old daughter, Leonore Cohn, to purchase a pail of milk from the store. About 10 minutes later, as Leonore was returning and climbing the stairs to her apartment building, she was brutally attacked. She was choked unconscious, stabbed multiple times with a sharp knife, and mutilated. Around 7:45 p.m., a neighbor, Augustus Johnson, discovered her after hearing faint whimpering outside her door. Though Leonore was still alive when found, she succumbed to her injuries shortly after an ambulance surgeon arrived on the scene. Investigators at the crime scene observed that Leonore had a clump of gray hair clenched in her left hand, indicating a struggle. Bruise marks on her neck suggested the assailant had large hands. While searching the building, police found blood droplets on 2 steps of another staircase on the opposite side of the tenement, though it was unclear if they were connected to the crime. Fingerprints were also identified on Leonore's face, throat, and the pail of milk she was carrying. Additionally, investigators discovered a piece of wet lemon drop candy on Leonore's body, implying she had been eating it. However, no stores in the area were known to sell that type of candy. In response to the horrific crime, 20 detectives were assigned to the case, and police maintained a heavy presence in the neighborhood in the days following the murder. On March 3, 1915, 4-year-old Charles Murray was brutally murdered beneath a dimly lit staircase in his family's tenement at 270 First Avenue. He was strangled, stabbed, mutilated, and disemboweled. When his family couldn't find him at 7:30 p.m., they began searching and soon discovered his lifeless body. Earlier that day, he had last been seen playing behind the tenement. Murray's sister claimed to have seen a strange man hurriedly leaving the building shortly before the body was found. However, police later dismissed her account as a figment of her imagination. The murder was quickly connected to the recent killing of Leonore Cohn. In response, an additional 80 homicide detectives were assigned to the investigation, bringing the total to 100 officers working on the case. Just moments before Murray's murder, a 6-year-old girl was attacked nearby, 5 doors up the street. While she waited for her aunt outside a bakery, a well-dressed man with a mustache and a black derby hat approached her. When she refused to speak to him, he grabbed her arm and dragged her into an open doorway. Her screams alerted neighbors who rushed to the scene, causing the man to flee before harming her. Shortly after Leonore Cohn's murder, Anne Cohn began receiving letters from an individual claiming to be the killer. These letters were signed Jack the Ripper, referencing the infamous London serial killer. Letters were handed over to the police, who involved United States postal inspectors. On April 29th, 27-year-old Edward Richmond was arrested in connection with the letters, but was soon cleared of involvement in the murder. The day after Richmond's arrest, Anne Cohn received another letter. Investigators initially believed Richmond might have written the letters to divert suspicion, but no evidence linked him to the final letters. Fingerprints were found on the correspondence, but they were too smudged to identify. After the murder of Charles Murray, his mother also received a chilling letter. While reading it in her kitchen, surrounded by friends, she collapsed. Unlike the earlier letters, this one was written in pencil, and the handwriting on the envelope was noticeably larger. Despite these differences, investigators could not identify the author or find further leads. The murders sparked widespread hysteria across New York and neighboring states. Fear and suspicion led locals to frequently accuse, chase, and even attack people they believed to be the perpetrator. Some individuals took advantage of the chaos, sending copycat letters claiming to be the murderer. On May 7, 1915, a 12-year-old boy was stabbed in the thigh. As he screamed, "I'm stabbed," men and women poured into the street shouting, "He's a ripper." They pursued the man accused of stabbing the boy. A police officer intervened, protecting the suspect in a drugstore until a patrol car arrived. The following day, 2 boys accused a man of acting suspiciously, leading 50 people to attack him. Police rescued the man before the situation escalated further. On May 17th, a patrolman was arrested for assaulting his wife and child. Rumors quickly spread that the police had captured the Ripper, prompting 1,000 angry locals to gather outside the station in protest. The panic extended beyond physical attacks. On May 9th, 2 housewives discovered threatening notes written in pencil on their doormats, claiming their children would be kidnapped and murdered the next day. Investigators traced the notes to 2 girls who admitted they wrote them as a prank. Similarly, on May 12th, a note from someone claiming to be the Ripper was traced to an 18-year-old woman who had written it to her employer out of spite. In Newark, the hysteria reached schools. At Lafayette School, 100 students chased a stranger who had been loitering on the grounds for a mile until a police officer detained him. The same day, 2 additional suspects were detained in Newark on suspicion of being the Ripper. However, all 3 individuals were ultimately cleared of any involvement. The case of the New York Ripper remains unsolved. In July of 1914, Charles Berg and Carl Hansen, members of the lettuce section of the anarchist Red Cross, began gathering dynamite sourced from Russia. They conspired with Industrial Workers of the World member Arthur Karen and stored the explosives at the apartment of Louise Berger, an ARC member and editor of the Mother Earth Emma Gold's magazine. Several meetings were held at the Farrer Center, where the group devised a plan for Karen, Berg, and Hansen to plant a bomb at John D. Rockefeller's home in Tarrytown, New York. Later accounts indicate that the 3 men, along with Alexander Berkman and Charles Robert Plunkett, met at the Farrer Center at least twice to discuss the plot. Plunkett later claimed that Berkman opted to stay behind the scenes due to his probation for attempting to assassinate Henry Clay Frick. While Berkman denied any involvement, opinions of his role remained divided. Plunkett also asserted that the bomb was not meant for Rockefeller or his home, but was intended as a symbolic act of protest. On July 4, 1914, at 6:30 p.m., an explosion and massive fire erupted at the Winchester Lighting Company in Tarrytown. The blast nearly consumed the company's gas holders and occurred in close proximity to the gasoline and oil tanks of Rockefeller's Standard Oil. At 9 a.m. on July 4th, Louise Berger left her tenement building at 1626 Lexington Avenue and headed to the Mother Earth offices at 119th Street. Just 15 minutes later, a devastating explosion ripped through the 6th floor of the Lexington Avenue building, located between 102nd and 103rd Streets in Harlem, only a few blocks from the Farrer Center. Witnesses saw debris and rubble rain down onto the crowded streets below. The blast obliterated the top 3 floors of the building, sending large pieces of furniture flying hundreds of feet through the air. The bomb, intended for John D. Rockefeller, had detonated prematurely inside Berger's apartment, killing Carl Hansen, Charles Berg, Arthur Karen, and Marie Chavez. Chavez was not believed to be part of the conspiracy, but had simply rented a room in the apartment. The force of the explosion flung Karen's body onto the building's shattered fire escape. The mutilated remains of Chavez and Hansen were discovered inside the wreckage, while Berg's body was torn apart with pieces strewn across the streets below. In total, 20 people were injured, 7 seriously enough to require hospitalization. Alexander Berkman attended the funerals of the deceased men. Berger later denied any involvement, and the police were unable to link her to the conspiracy. Another IWW member, Mike Murphy, had been staying in the apartment at the time of the explosion. The blast collapsed the floor beneath him, causing his bed to plunge into the apartment below. Despite being momentarily stunned, he escaped with only minor bruises and the loss of some clothing. Sought for questioning by police, Murphy managed to flee to Mother Earth headquarters, where Berkman is believed to have orchestrated his escape. Assisted by fellow conspirator Charles Robert Plunkett, Murphy was smuggled first to New Jersey, then to Philadelphia by members of the Radical Library, and finally across the border into Canada. The deaths of the bomb makers did not mark the end of the attacks against John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. On November 19, 1915, another bomb plot was uncovered, this time targeting John D. Archibald, the president of Standard Oil, at his Tarrytown residence. Authorities suspected that anarchists and IWW radicals were behind the attempt, likely as a protest against the execution of IWW member Joe Hill in Salt Lake City, Utah. The plot was foiled when a gardener discovered 4 sticks of dynamite, each weighing 1 pound, partially buried in a rut along the driveway, just 50 feet from the home's front entrance. The sticks were bound together with wire, fitted with percussion caps, and camouflaged with paper matching the color of the driveway. The path where the explosives were planted was regularly used by Archibald when traveling to and from his home by automobile. The bomb was successfully defused by police before it could detonate.